Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our session this morning for the Minnesota Arrest Campaign Legislative Recap Session. This morning, we're going to talk about the work that the Arrest Campaign has been able to do this last legislative session. The Arrest Campaign is a coalition led by three organizations, the African Career Education and Resources, Inc., represented by myself, the Housing Justice Center, represented by Margaret Kaplan, and the Minnesota Housing Partnership, represented by Elizabeth Glidden. And the campaign also is a coalition that works with folks who are most impacted by the housing issues that we work to address. And so this last legislative session, this was a fast session, but we're glad that we were able to work with, in partnership with folks from our community and as well as other organizational allies to continue the work that we had begun last session to continue to advance housing equity and housing justice at the legislature. So one of the things that we want to highlight that went well this past legislative session and in line with our goals was to continue advocating for increased funding for housing. And this past legislative session, we were able to successfully have $8.1 million added to the Family Housing Prevention and Assistance Program and an additional $471,000 to help implement recommendations to get emergency rental assistance to households as quickly as possible. And the key word here is getting rental assistance as quickly as possible. From the genesis of the Arrest campaign, that has always been one of our goals, is that emergency rental assistance can be moved expeditiously to the families that need it because they are facing critical emergency situations. In addition, for advocating for additional funding, we still had some leftover policy work that we were working on to ensure that the processes of getting emergency rental assistance to families and to our community members is streamlined. So we want to highlight some of the policies that were able to be passed this session that we believe are going to be able to be critical and helpful in getting us to where we would like to be. So one of those policy recommendations was requiring the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency, in consultation with others, to annually project the emergency rental assistance needs. We all know that the need has always and continues to be bigger than the money allocated, and so we think that making a projection, at least to be able to highlight what the need is going to be helpful. Another policy was that requiring Minnesota Housing Finance Agency to deliver emergency rental assistance in a way that is culturally responsive and trauma-informed. And in the course of doing our work, and as we continue to do our work, there's a lot to unpack just about that statement alone. Minnesota Housing Finance Agency is to process applications within 2 weeks and make payments to landlords in 30 days if approved. Again, addressing the emergency situation is critical. And so being able to have a timeline where landlords and tenants are not guessing how long is this going to take is also critical. Another one is mandating the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency to develop an e-signature option for applications for FHPAP. So this gives applicants different options of being able to access the application and get the application completed. And also requiring Minnesota Housing Finance Agency to make recommendations to the legislature to simplify the verification process of applicants. So the process of application has been for a long time and continues to generate a lot of conversation. So we want to, and it's something also that we learned very clearly during the pandemic, we want to make sure that the application process is as simple as possible and that verification of applications is as simple as possible and streamlined so that it can be efficient. Again, time is usually of the essence when folks are applying for emergency rental assistance. And so we want the service to match the situation that people are facing. So those are some of the highlights, and I will have Elizabeth come in to engage, to move us to the next session of our webinar, to engage in some conversation with some of the folks who we worked with this past legislative session.
I think we're turning to Margaret next, unless your speakers aren't here. Why don't you take it over, Margaret?
Great. Thank you. So I am going to see who we have on the phone. So next up we have hopefully Representative Howard and Senator Mohammed. Are you both on?
I see Representative Howard.
I'm here.
Okay, great. I don't see Senator Mohammed. Well, why don't we can get started, and then hopefully she's able to join us. I know that people are still very busy recovering from this last legislative session. But there was a lot that happened. And I guess one of the things we wanted to do was to just kind of share some space with some of the legislative champions who really worked so hard this last year, learn a little bit more about what happened, and talk a little bit about what may be happening moving forward. And we will have some time for folks to ask some questions as well, too. I guess I'm going to kick it off with something. So Representative Howard, as you think about what happened this last legislative session, and you think about particularly this issue of our housing support system and the financial services, what do you see as sort of the biggest win from this past session, and also the biggest missed opportunity?
Thanks, Margaret, and thanks, everybody. And apologies, I'm in between another housing meeting this morning, and so I have my camera off for the moment. So great question. I mean, really what I would say in terms of the biggest wins of this session, I really see it as a continuation of our historic work last session. And, you know, in so many ways, I think we wanted to find ways to build on the momentum of last year of the historic investments we're making. And of course, we had far less resource, but from my perspective, our biggest wins were focusing on our funding levels in ways that will address the most acute challenges and prevent homelessness. And so to devote the lion's share of our small target towards FHPAP, we know that those resources will have a huge impact and are able to be deployed quickly. And then in support for our nonprofit housing providers to sort of continue our work to stabilize housing and prevent displacement was another big win on funding. And then from a policy perspective, I really do think some of our biggest wins are going to not be seen immediately, but in hopefully the system change that will come as a result of the work we began. And I'm thinking specifically about the reforms that came out of our work group related to delivery of emergency rental assistance. Nalima sort of ticked off some of the pieces that were included. I really believe that that work can lead to a more responsive system, and one that we're delivering resources more quickly, and ultimately preventing evictions, preventing homelessness, and getting resources to folks before that housing crisis presents itself. So those are some of the key victories. I would say, from my perspective, missed opportunities was sort of the larger structural change that we need, both from a funding perspective and from a policy perspective. So from a funding perspective, we really are still not going to solve our housing crisis unless we have additional new long-term statewide revenues. And so, you know, the constitutional amendment to provide dedicated revenues was introduced. We had more momentum to sort of socialize and talk about that issue, but ultimately it wasn't one that moved forward. And I think we need to continue that work. And then on the policy perspective, you know, we really built a broad coalition to take a hard look at the state's role in local planning and zoning, to end a lot of the exclusionary zoning practices that are so prevalent still, and to unlock more housing production, both of affordable multifamily and affordable ownership opportunities. And ultimately, most of that work did not progress. Again, it's an area where we built a lot of momentum with this idea and the coalition we're building. But I would cite those two as sort of the bigger picture structural change items that we need to keep working on as the missed opportunities.
One of the things that was interesting to watch play out over the session was, you know, well, and even before that was the working group on expediting rental assistance and the recommendations that came out of that, but also to see the number of people with lived experience who came out and testified for bills. I'm thinking about folks who are connected to Erase, connected to the SHIP campaign, connected to the work that the Coalition for the Homeless was doing. As you think about the recommendations moving forward, and sort of refining those to meet the needs of people who are trying to navigate those systems, what do you think those opportunities look like, and where do you think people with lived experience can kind of plug into the bigger conversation to move together some of those larger system reforms?
A great conversation. And, you know, we were intentional when we created that task force to create pathways for us to center the experiences of Minnesotans with lived experiences that have experience navigating systems that have too many barriers, that have created these challenges that we're working to solve. And so now that we're transitioning to bills that have passed, in large part because of that advocacy and lived experience, it's vital that we make sure we create pathways when we start to implement these things for those voices to be clear and present. And so in some of the legislation, we're intentional about asking state agencies that are entrusted now with implementing these changes to do coordination with Minnesotans and groups that are centering the lives of Minnesotans with lived experiences. And so some of that work still remains to be seen about functionally what that will look like. But I can tell you that it was part of the conversation with state agencies who were both part of the task force and then part of the legislative folks working to pass these bills to create those pathways, because I think that will be important for us to get it right, because with all of this, it's one thing for us to pass legislation, it's another thing for us to implement it well and do so with an eye towards equity, with an eye towards making sure that these systems will change and work better for people.
You know, one of the things that I think you've mentioned it, and I know that a lot of the folks on this call have experienced in working on housing, is that people care about housing, but it tends to kind of get lost in the overall conversation at the end of a session. And I'm thinking about, as we're heading into next year, which is going to be a budget year, but there are also some still big policy things. What do you think we need to be doing more of in order to make sure that housing as an issue and as a priority doesn't get lost at the legislature, particularly when we look at this issue of our emergency assistance and prevention of homelessness system?
It's a great question. one thing I would say is that because of a lot of the people on this call and our overall housing advocates, we've made a ton of progress on this over just my short time at the legislature. You know, I've noted that each year a new term has begun. It seems to me more housing champions in the legislature. And I believe a lot of that is because that those legislators, especially new legislators when they're getting elected, are hearing more from their constituents. They're hearing more from organizations that are saying this is not just a priority, it's the priority, or it's one of the most important priorities for our community to address. And so I think that that level of organizing still is vital when it comes to especially the bigger systems level change pieces. We just need more legislators to hear from more of their constituents and more groups organizing around these big ideas. And one piece I'd add is the urgency piece. I think we need to continue to do a better job communicating the narrative of urgency when it relates to kind of our holistic challenges related to our massive housing shortage, our huge challenge with family homelessness, and the reality that we need bold action now if we're going to hope to create a future in Minnesota where you know, an affordable home is a reality for many more Minnesotans. And so again, long story short is we've made a lot of progress on this to elevate the issue. And so in some ways it's continuing to build on those successes.
One of the things that just kind of tracking the chat, and something that a number of people have brought up that's kind of connects to something you mentioned, is this question about accountability, right? So resources are getting deployed to communities, and sometimes people are having a really difficult time accessing those. And it seems to be particularly true in greater Minnesota communities and rural places. I guess my question is, and hopefully someone will back me up on this, how do we both create that level of accountability for systems to be working the way that they're supposed to, and for people to be treated with dignity in these systems, without, on the other hand, getting this level of backlash that sometimes happens anytime anybody critiques a system, right? So we need these systems to exist. How do we make them better without that getting kind of weaponized by people who don't want to put any money into our emergency systems?
It's a really good question. And it's such an important, the accountability piece is so important for a couple of reasons. One, the straightforward, obvious reason is that we need to, the extent of the challenges that Minnesotans are facing requires us to maximize every dollar for the most good. And accountability will be important, especially because a lot of the things that we funded over the last 2 years are new. And, you know, we need to make sure that as we're creating new programs, we're doing so with an eye towards accessibility and equity, and not creating some of these barriers. You know, it is true that there's opponents that will, you know, seek any opportunity to sort of say, oh, here's a problem, and so because of that, we shouldn't be doing X. But I think to the extent there's a balance there, it's more important that we raise up and create more transparency publicly through the legislative process and through other means to put a spotlight on our existing programs and current programs and push ourselves to be better, because that shouldn't be threatening. It shouldn't be threatening for legislators, for state agencies to say, we know that our systems over many years have not met the mark when it comes to opportunity and accessibility for all people in all places. And so I think decision makers, both in the legislature and in the administration, we should be comfortable with feeling a little bit of pressure and seeking ways to put that front and center, because we'll be better as a result.
One of the things that was really interesting, and it's a little hidden in the housing finance bill, was language that basically allows the agency or authorizes the agency, Minnesota Housing, to use eligibility for other income-based programs as eligibility for Minnesota housing programs, like, for example, FHPAP. But it is a may, not a shall. Kind of thinking about that and the level of sort of discretion within programs, how do you think about like that balance between flexibility and urgency? So in other words, giving an agency the ability to use the resources and tools in a variety of different ways, but also knowing that there's these immediate and urgent needs that exist in communities.
Well, this came up through just generally speaking, that friction came up throughout the process of our work group on emergency rental assistance. And back to sort of the centering Minnesotans with lived experiences, we heard kind of story after story about ways that folks were facing a housing crisis, and because of the systems and barriers in place, they were not able to, have the correct paperwork or, dot one I or cross a T in the right way, and people lost homes as a result. And to me, that balance, every single time I'm going to choose trying to reduce those barriers to create opportunity. So I think that change is a good one. And it's sort of part of the driving force between a lot of the changes that we're trying to make within our emergency systems, is to reduce those barriers and acknowledge that a housing crisis takes many forms. And I think we should be as flexible as we can and trust Minnesotans when they tell us they're in a crisis. And so there's that's sort of a driving force between some of those changes. And as we sort of get to the implementation phase, it'll be important, kind of as a previous question mentioned, to keep those lived experiences in front and center.
I think we have time for a couple of questions from the audience. Lots of comments, fewer questions. Rico.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Howard. Thank you, everyone here. I was just wondering about the lack of sort of the resources that we failed in this recent legislative session. We have some successes, we have some victories, and then we have some things that we didn't get. The lack of housing units, 100,000 housing units in Minnesota or Hennepin County. We need so much housing, and the affordability of housing and the quality of housing. It seems to keep pointing me towards the sort of the cause and effect of homelessness and housing justice. To me, it seems like my whole life, it seems like it's been intentional, and it's a system that was built that is a system. And this isn't necessarily this is less of a question and more of a statement, but there seems to be a lot more realization that the system is an oppressive system. It is an oppressive system that was built to oppress, and we are here living into it and breaking free of it more and more. Do you agree with that sort of that ideology that the system that we're working in can be oppressive, and that we are doing changes, making changes to break free and to offer help to others?
Great question, and I absolutely agree. I mean, when you look the deep, especially racial disparities that we have in housing in our state, in our country, are the direct result of systemic racism and racist policies, and things like redlining. And what we have now is some of those same systemic challenges, and they're a little bit more indirect. But and so, this year as an example, we tried to look at what are exclusionary zoning policies that have the effect of preventing more housing opportunities, especially opportunities for lower income Minnesotans or renters, policies that are accentuating one of the nation's worst racial homeownership gaps. And so, and we faced all kinds of barriers. We made a lot of progress, but we ultimately didn't get that across. And I was struck by, a lot of the things we sort of heard from opponents of this, were under a sort of a facade of keeping really a system that's fundamentally has structural racism built into our housing system. And so we need to acknowledge that that's our past. We need to acknowledge that that's still our present in a lot of ways, and look for intentional ways to create different systems. And I think we're doing that, but that work continues. We've got a lot more to do.
Thank you so much.
One question that I have, it's a little bit related, but that is, one of the things the legislature did this past session is created kind of a legislative working group or a task force, potato, right? But about the financial sustainability of affordable housing, because we know that that affordable housing is struggling. But the group doesn't include any renters or any people who are the folks who are living in affordable rental housing. It's primarily people who are in the business of affordable housing. Do you have any insight into how people who are renters, or are sort of trying to navigate these housing systems or living in the housing that we're talking about can be engaged and involved in discussions about the future of affordable housing?
Yeah, so you're referring to the work group on exploring the sort of sustainability, long-term health of our affordable housing providers. And we did create, I don't have the language in front of me, but some organizations that directly work and represent with people with lived experience will be represented on that task force. And our thinking there is that will create some opportunities and pathways for folks with lived experiences to participate. That task force will also be conducted through the LCC, the Legislative Coordinating Commission, and we'll do so in a public way. I expect to be a legislative member on it, and have already thought about ways we can use that process to create opportunities for testimony, and make sure that those voices are present, because you're right, it's essential that those perspectives are part of the conversation. It was really helpful. I think really the model that we had in this task force on emergency rental assistance can be a model where we had representation from groups that mission and focus is working with renters, present, charged with bringing those perspectives to the group. And so I think there's some models we can work on from that perspective too.
Great. Any other questions from folks in the crowd? Okay. Well, I think I'm going to then pass it along. Thank you so much, Representative Howard, for your time and your passion for this issue. It's been really important, I think, for all of our work to have somebody who's willing to be a champion for something that I think everybody knows is important, but sometimes gets hidden in the conversation. I am now going to pass it along to Elizabeth Glidden for our next panel.
Hi, everyone. My name's Elizabeth I'm with MHP, and I'm really excited about this next segment, which is a renter panel, a community expert panel, where I think we'll have some good conversation and open to questions too. I wanted to start this though by talking a little bit about the Erase campaign itself, which began with renter leadership, specifically of Ms. Julian Jackson and Linda Soderstrom, both of whom are on this call. And those two incredible leaders have really helped year after year after year to build this campaign. And so wanted to say a tremendous thank you to both of them, and also that we are excited to feature some voices here that are not new to community advocacy, but are newer to this campaign in this section we're calling our renter panel. And we have three guests here today. We have Marlena Yash, justice consultant, and community advocate Sharon Harris, and community advocate Rico Morales. And I'm going to start this off by kind of pointing to each of them to do a little bit deeper self-introduction. Asking each of you to tell us a little bit about your story, what brought you to this work, where do you call home? And I'm going to ask Marlena to start us off here. Marlena, are you here?
Yep, I'm here. Hi, Elizabeth. Hello, everyone. I am from the rural and central Minnesota. I'm located in St. Cloud. So I'm a person with lived experience. So my lived experience of homelessness comes from the rural area of Minnesota, much more rural than St. Cloud, actually. So that's where my experience comes from and where I live now. And how I got involved in this work was actually an eviction due to domestic violence. And then the whole court process and all of that. And then also I got an opportunity to be a person with lived experience who then became a consultant in the last couple of years. So I've been consulting for other agencies. I sit on a couple of boards now. And that's kind of been my process of how I came to this work, because I have personal lived experience of homelessness in the system and kind of how it works out here. So that's how I came to this work. Thank you.
Ms. Sharon, would you be willing to share some?
She seems to be muted.
Ms. Sharon, are you? A little bit.
Okay.
There, perfect.
All right. Yes, thanks again for having me. Yes, I'm Sharon Harris, and I'm currently living in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota. It's just been a joy to be with the panel here today. And I came through kind of unexpectedly, rolled up my sleeves here in Brooklyn Center after a brand new apartment complex came along, and I joined in, and my husband and I rented. But then it was faced with a lot of challenges in regards to numerous things with right now we're in like 7 managers that were appointed to this community. I've seen a bunch of different challenges that has occurred within the rentals and this apartment complex, which caused me to pull up my sleeves and dig in. I was a part of it, and I knew something had to take place. Was not aware of all of the different functions and foundations that funding that I'm here with today. But when you're in the fight, you just roll up your sleeves and begin. And so that's how I got aboard. I'm in for the long haul. I realize that there are a lot of trying to prevent a lot of things from happening from the ground. And when you don't have a voice and people speaking up for those that are really in the fight of it all, you get lost in the shuffles, and therefore that's how you have even more homeless residents because of lack of accountability.
Thank you, Ms. Sharon. Rico, would love to hear from you.
Buenos dias, todo gente aquí. Bonjour. Good morning, everyone. My family and friends, my relatives here, thank you. My name is Rico Morales, and I am a lifelong resident of Minnesota. I was born into generational poverty and generational homelessness all my life in Minnesota. And I was a chronic drug addict for 30 years, and I was on probation for 30 years. So I have a lifelong history of lived experience. And I am now, since 2012, I got out of jail, went into the shelter, and was invited into permanent supportive housing. And I've been sober for more than 13 years. I've survived 2 overdoses, and I'm fully housed. All of my civil rights have been restored. And I am an advocate for others in housing, in justice work, and in community gardening. I was an employee at Cup Foods when George Floyd was murdered by a Minneapolis Police Department. And so I carry, we all carry the weight of memory and the weight of trauma in our very bones. And I am at this work for Hennepin County on behalf of the state of Minnesota and nationally as well. I am a paid consultant for National Alliance to End Homelessness as well. And I'll be going to their conference in July. So I want to bring all of these issues to Tina Smith, Senator Tina Smith, Amy Klobuchar, Ilhan Omar when I'm in Washington, D.C. And I want to bring all of this attention to more and more housing support, more and more funding. When I go nationally or locally here in the city of Minneapolis, I'm on the Housing Advisory Committee, and I am advocating fiercely for others who unfortunately didn't make it. I have buried 2 roommates in the past 5 months due to overdose, and I myself survived 2 overdoses in my former chemical behavior. But I'm happy to be here today. I'm happy to continue the fight for others. I'm happy to help others, and I do this work because it's what I was born to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rico, and congratulations on your 13 years and so much more. We wanted to, just hear a little bit from the panel on kind of what's happening on the ground, so to speak. What are you seeing? What are you flagging that are challenges to renter stability within your community, within your networks? And we were going to start off with Ms. Sharon to share some of what she has been noting and participating in.
Yes, I just wanted to say I'm recently retired, moved in a 55 plus senior facility. After you've worked hard maintaining a job and whatnot, and you move in a senior community, and this is a community was really founded to have affordable housing. And the challenges that I've witnessed and even for myself is after being here within a year, affordable housing didn't become affordable housing. We ended up with a challenge, like I stated before, of several managers that were assigned to this complex. And then because of mishandlement, there have been raised rent that have gone to what they call it I'm trying to think of the word they used, uh, um, to where it's higher rent than ever before. And the issue that I'm seeing now, you have seniors that have had to go out and find affordable housing, which this complex was geared to affordable housing. And so, it went to market rate rent is what they called it, market rate rent. So you get into affordable housing, you sign a lease, and then within the next year, you're kicked up to market rate rent. Well, the challenges I'm seeing, it's going to start snowballing, where you're going to have homeless seniors, and not because you want to be homeless, but because the market rate rent is geared to put you at a status where you can't afford the rent. And then next thing you know, you're out. There were 66 or 67 renters here that ended up with letters stating that they were, you know, went to month leasing, which was not correct. But because of the fact, the challenges is now we have renters that have gone on looking for other places with affordable. And so some have moved into new affordable apartments. But the challenge is, after a year of being on a lease and get ready to sign a new lease the next year, then it's kicked up to market rate rent. And there we are. You got seniors that are looking for new places or are now homeless.
Thank you, Ms. Sharon. And yes, escalating rents, other practices that make it harder to be stable in your home. Thank you for flagging what's happening. Rico, I know you also had some unique things you wanted to share that are challenges.
In the housing systems and housing programming, we have departments and we have services and resources. What I believe we are lacking more and more of is the connections, the community, and the relationships for people living in housing to communicate, to organize, to process, to heal. We heal through relationships. And Housing First is a relationship. It's a relationship between a renter, a tenant, an occupant, and a case manager and a housing provider. But we need more relationships. We need to rehumanize the programming and rehumanize the departments and the housing system. It's a system that is a system, and we need to remember that these are not just clients and representatives and caseworkers, but we are real people needing real things, connections, communities, celebrations. We need the old-fashioned village again, and it's been disappearing quite rapidly through these past few years. And when we get together in person, is a lot. To me, it's a little bit better for developing the organizational structure that we need for addressing these concerns, addressing these housing concerns, these community concerns, talking to your property owners and your housing providers, and reimagining what can be possible with a better organization. Organize is always that's always my phrase. I just want to keep asking people for, when we talk about issues and problems, let's look at the solutions. What are the steps? What are the plans? What is the work plan? What are the details that we need to go into to move beyond speaking about the problems, to move beyond speaking about the struggles? And we do need to speak about the struggles and the problems, but what next? What else is there? What are the next steps? So thank you.
Rico, thank you so much for that move into what are those community-based solutions. And to kind of add on to this, I wanted to turn to Marlena. I know you've been working quite a bit on sharing a vision of what does it mean to have a supportive system for housing stability. You've also been a tremendous advocate for how does that system also serve greater Minnesota and very small communities. Marlena, what would you like to add for this?
I think that it all ties into what I call true accountability. Accountability that is not just a word, but accountability and transparency. We have a real lack of that, even though the words are thrown around. And I think it ties into the challenges, at least in my community, that I see, because I see not only, not enough money, there's never enough money, there never will be, but what I see is a lack of accountability on the part of agencies distributing funding in my community. So even if the money gets here, that doesn't mean it's properly being distributed in a way that helps people who are on the verge of homelessness or who are homeless. So that's one of the challenges that I see in my community. And I think that, part of that vision and mission that is going to equal no homelessness needs to have true accountability and actual transparency, if that makes sense. Thank you.
I know this issue on accountability came up also in the Q&A with Representative Howard, and just because I've heard Ms. Sharon talk about accountability quite a lot too, I just am curious, how do you think accountability should enter into this conversation about solutions? Or how do you talk about accountability in terms of the work you'd like to see, Ms. Sharon?
Well, getting more of the legislators and different ones involved in making sure when you make a plan to have it all executed. And when it's not executed, it may look good on paper, it may look good in the meeting forces, but when you look at the overall community, the accountability is not there. You have a diverse of people in the communities where there are language barriers, there are understanding barriers, there, we have all of the different technology, but then education wise, it's not enough to go around and educate, especially seniors, in how the rent is paid. And so a lot of those different things are dropped in the system as far as people being able to make sure they're taking care of their needs and their businesses. But on the upper crust portion, the accountability is not there. You're not having people come out and see, hey, what's really happening? What's really going on? Is this being handled correctly? It looks good. The buildings look great. They're coming up beautifully. But the execution and accountability of those that have placed different organizations in place are not following through. And so that's where the accountability is lacking. And, even more so, I'm looking at personally just kind of putting together, the group that I have here just got started, but being able to say, hey, you have to have the resources to know who to go to for each individual is different, but accountability plays a very big role in making sure all of this is executed. Thank you.
Have we lost Elizabeth?
I think
I
so.
think so, yeah. It's,
Okay.
there she
Oh,
is.
there you're back, Elizabeth. We thought we lost you for a second.
Yes, my internet just cut out. I apologize, everyone. So I know that, thank you so much. I know we are just like a couple minutes before close. And so I wanted to know if each of the panelists maybe wanted to close us out with sort of a short comment on what you'd like to leave the rest of us with. We've talked a bit about building power and what housing justice looks like. Quick last words, Rico?
Renters' Rights Resource Fair, City of Minneapolis, Public Service Building today, 10:30 to 1:30. I know it's local, but there's something going on in the city here that they're talking about Renters' Rights Resource Fair. It's a big event. I'm gonna go and I'll have a little report back. Get involved, stay alert, get those alerts, stay connected, and keep doing good, keep doing well.
Thank you, Rico. Miss Sharon, last words?
Oh my God, that was just great. Rico just he summed it the whole thing up. And just getting involved and pulling your sleeves up and not leaving it for the other person, and just making sure that education wise different things are brought out to our neighborhoods and our communities where we can build the gap and close the gap of homelessness.
Thank you,
Thank
Miss
you.
Sharon.
Mhm.
Marlena, last words, and then Nalima, close us out.
As always, I think for people to learn how to advocate for policy and procedure change at a city, county, and state level, whatever that looks like, whether you get on the board of the COC and you do it from there, or whatever housing avenue that can take, that can lead to true accountability and transparency, and also power sharing at a state level. Whatever it takes to get that done, that's what I would say, and that's the road that I'm taking. So thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone who participated in our panel today, and for everyone who attended. So I just want to close us out real quick, and I just want to really talk about what does the work ahead for us look like in terms of the Erase campaign, and what is left to be done in the 2023 and 2024 biennium, and it all ties into everything that we have had today. So first and foremost, as we said, as a race campaign, we center our work around the folks who are most impacted, and we have had very clearly one of the issues is that we need to center the humanity of the folks who are impacted into our work. So we need a people-centered approach. We need to rehumanize the programming, and that is centered around connections, communities, and relationships. So this work is about people and about meeting people's needs. And so we need to remember that and center that. And as a race campaign, we will continue to work with the folks who are most impacted to continue to lead on these issues. The other issue we had about was about accountability. All across the board, accountability and transparency, so that when policies are passed, when projects are built, that, you know, we don't get to switch that around when folks have already signed leases, already living in those communities. So that all leads us to systemic change. How do we design an effective system? Representative Howard talked about that, and there's some policies that were passed this last session. But I think a key thing for us as a race campaign that we're going to be looking at is how are those new policies being implemented, and how do we continue to troubleshoot? You know, what is the feedback? We hope the agency will be receptive to feedback so that we can continue to troubleshoot on those systems to make sure the system is effective. And most of all, we know that the need is so much greater than the amount of money that is put into the pot. So funding continues to be a big issue. We need to invest in housing because it is a basic and fundamental human right. And one of the things that Representative Howard talked about is how do we put in additional funding for the long term? And so revenue continues to be a big issue. And as a race campaign, the members of the race campaign are involved in the constitutional amendment, you know, to make sure that there is a dedicated source of funding for housing for our state. And some other policy issues to continue to look at is what the state was trying to do, and that is the state taking a hard look to look at how to end discriminatory zoning practices are at a local level. So all that to say that there's still a lot of work ahead of us. Stay tuned and stay engaged. And thank you so much for joining us this morning. Have a good morning.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.